Good morning, everyone. Today we are examining some lessons from Jeremiah chapter 16. In this particular chapter, God is going to talk to Jeremiah about the upcoming problems that Israel is going to face. And he's going to talk to Jeremiah initially in the chapter about some of the personal things, some of the personal impacts that it's going to have upon him. And that's where we want to start this morning. In Jeremiah chapter 16 and in verse number 2, God says, "You shall not take a wife, nor shall you have sons or daughters in this place. For thus says the Lord concerning the sons and daughters who are born in this place, and concerning their mothers who bore them, and their fathers who begot them in this land, they shall die gruesome deaths, they shall not be lamented, nor shall they be buried, but they shall be like refuse on the face of the earth. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, and their corpses shall be meat for the beasts of heaven and for the beasts of the earth, for the birds of heaven and the beasts of the earth." Here you have the statement that God gives to Jeremiah, that Jeremiah is not to take a wife, and he is not to have children from among this people. And that is going to be a very difficult thing, for Jeremiah, obviously. Remember that he is a rather young man at this point, and he has been given orders from God that he is not to take a wife and he is not to have children. Now, this is not a punishment for Jeremiah. Rather, this is God trying to protect Jeremiah because of the circumstances that are coming and because of the things that are taking place. If Jeremiah were to have a wife and children, there would be great difficulties and there would be great danger that they would face in Judah at this particular time. And it does lean to us a message that, it's not required that an individual get married, nor is it always the best situation for an individual to get married in given circumstances. You think also about a New Testament reference in this regard, and that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul talks about that under the current distress, whatever that current distress was, that it was better for a man not to marry a woman unless it was absolutely necessary. He says it's better to marry than to burn. But on the other side of things, if there was any way to avoid it, given the current circumstances, it would be far better to remain single, to remain unattached in those ways. And so there are times and there are places where getting married and having a wife and having children and all of those circumstances might not be the best for an individual. And while we most of the time don't look at it that way, God says there is truth to that. Now, that doesn't mean that every time and in every place that is the case, but certainly there are times where it is the case. So it's something we need to be cognizant of. There are situations in which the right answer is not to get married and to have kids in those situations. The second thing I want to point out from chapter 16 is found in verse 11. He says, "Then you shall say to them, because your fathers have forsaken me." This is the answer to why it is that these things have come along and what it is that has been the people's sin against the Lord. He says, "Because your fathers have forsaken me, says the Lord, they have walked after other gods and have served them and worshipped them and have forsaken me and not kept my law." Now, if we were to stop right there, you have a situation where God says the reason why they're being punished is because of what their fathers have done. And it would be very easy for them to look around and to blame their ancestors, blame their forefathers, and say, "See, look at what you have done to us." But notice what he says in verse 12. He says, "And you have done worse than your fathers, for behold, each one follows the dictates of his own evil heart, so that no one listens to me." A lot of times we like to blame others. We like to blame those around us. We like to blame our parents. We like to blame our grandparents. We like to blame whoever it is that maybe isn't even around anymore for the problems that we are in. And yet, God says that while, yes, they may have a share of the blame depending on what the situation is, that the choices that we make ourselves are also to blame for putting us in our current situations. You know, we live in a world that really likes to talk down and to bemoan and to demean generations of the past. And yet, are we any better? Are we doing any better? Are we even trying to be better? Or are we just taking the mistakes that they have made and moving them even further down the line in our society? Continuing down the same wrong direction, just taking it even further. We need to we need to recognize the fact that God is going to judge us for our choices and for our actions. And that, yes, it may be that our fathers did things that were wrong and went the wrong direction, but that does not excuse us for our choices in taking it even further. The last thing I want to notice from chapter 16 is found in verse 14, where there God says, "Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that it shall be no more said, the Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt. But rather the Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands where he had driven them. For I will bring them back into their land, which I gave to their fathers." Here God makes a statement and he says that the time is going to come shortly when they will no longer say of me, "The Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt." You know, up until this time, that's how God was known. He was the God of Israel who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, because between the miracles that were done in Egypt, between the crossing of the Red Sea, and all of those things that transpired, that was the way that God was known and the reputation that he had. He said, "My reputation is going to be different from here on out." He says, "Soon I will be known as the Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands where he had driven them." In other words, he is going to be remembered more in the generations to come for his bringing his people back from captivity than he is for bringing them out of captivity in generations gone by. You know, oftentimes we remember the most what it is you've done for me lately. Well, that's what God's saying here. The people are going to remember him, the nations are going to remember him as the one who brought his people back from the north. And that is going to be the reputation that is going to be held in future generations. Those are some of the things that I found in Jeremiah chapter 16. I hope that they've been beneficial to you. Tomorrow we will come back, Lord willing, and examine Jeremiah chapter 17. But until then, have a great day.